In the dead of night, when the moon is high and ill winds blow, and the banshees cry and the moonlight casts an unearthly glow, arise, my love, with tales of woe.
Good evening. It is 12 midnight, the paranormal hour. Welcome to Ghost to Ghost. I'm your host, Chief Lawson. Ghost to Ghost is a podcast to discuss all paranormal and parapsychology subjects. You can find Ghost to Ghost on all major formats, so tell your friends, tell your family. Come listen to Ghost to Ghost. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It is the midnight hour. It is time for Ghost to Ghost. We hope you're doing well this evening. As we begin tonight's subject, the Beck Poltergeist. With me tonight is my co-host, Jennifer Verne, research manager and podcast producer.
Good evening.
And Heather Lawson, case manager and podcast director.
Hello.
So tonight, we're going to talk about the Beck Poltergeist. Jennifer, tell me about the Beck Poltergeist.
Okay. Well, tonight's episode is going to be a little short and sweet because you guys know that this is coming out when we're in Michigan Paracon.
Yes.
We didn't want to leave you guys without an episode, so I thought, well, let's just find some quick little Indiana haunt that I can just give you something so we can put something up, record beforehand, and have it on the book so that we can put it out while we're gone. And I found this little ditty. And it actually turned out to be a bigger story. And it actually probably could have had a bigger episode. But anyway, it isn't going to be because I didn't do any research into it. I just took the story from a couple of sources I found. And we're going to go with it. So here we go. The Beck Poltergeist. I found the story while flipping through the Haunted Hoosier Trails book. And that is by a lady called Wanda Lou Willis. And it's just a short little footnote, not a footnote. It's just like a 2-page excerpt here in her book. And it's detailing a night of poltergeist activity, glass breaking, and so forth. So much so that the ladies in the house actually left the house the first night and went to stay at a hotel. And then came back the next day, only to have the poltergeist activity start up again at 2 o'clock in the afternoon.
Wow.
The outbreak began on Sunday night, March 11th, 1962, at 2910 North Delaware Street, just a few minutes past 10 p.m. According to Miss Renata Beck, she shared the large 2-story house with her widowed mother, Miss Lena Gemecki, 61 years old, and her daughter Linda, 13. Evidently, it started with a beer mug in the kitchen that had moved on its own. Miss Beck and her mother said that the mug lifted up out of the sink and flew and fell behind a flower pot. Of course, they were both in the room when it happened, but of course neither of them were anywhere near the glass when it happened. Then they hear a glass break upstairs, and they thought that maybe somebody had broken into the house, because I guess in this neighborhood those things were starting to happen in the neighborhood. So they went upstairs, but what they actually found was a vase that had fallen and crashed. Now, this was a vase that had come with the mother, Miss Lena Gemecki, from Germany. She brought it with her from Germany. Keep that in mind. And then a little bit later, about a half an hour later, at 11 o'clock, an ashtray was thrown across the room, shattered and broke.
Wow.
Got that picked up. And then at 11:30, another piece of crystal was tossed and shattered. And at this point, the ladies are like, we're done. We're leaving. They packed Linda up and they got out to a hotel. So when they returned the next day, the reports say about 1:30 or so. 2 o'clock, glass starts breaking again. And so much so that they were going upstairs and downstairs as one thing got cleaned up.
Chasing the noise.
As one thing got cleaned up, they would hear a noise downstairs, go downstairs, more broken glass, have to clean that up. Finally, they just called the police. Sergeant John Mullen was the first officer to arrive. and he found 3 very nervous, very agitated women and
Yeah.
a house full of broken glass.
Wow.
Yeah, so
And that
to a police officer,
yeah.
you're thinking domestic violence right there.
Well,
right?
yeah, I would say so. I mean,
You're not thinking paranormal.
It doesn't matter whether it's husband or wife or 2 women. I mean, it certainly looks like a domestic issue right there on the spot.
Right, but he ventured to say that the damage was maybe done by a hi-fi stereo being played too loud, causing vibrations and things
That's some
rattling
high
off shelf.
notes, let me tell you.
Right, or a pellet gun. Maybe somebody was shooting
that
BB
would
guns.
be, yeah.
But there were no massive stereo systems in the house, just a small record player for the ladies had. And all the windows were closed and intact with no BB gun bullets.
Yeah, and honestly, back in the 70s, I mean, I had one. I mean, every boy had one. I remember one time we were in the woods and we thought we were shooting because there was a bunch of abandoned vehicles, and we thought, oh God, this one's got headlights, we can shoot them out. After we shot them out, we found out it wasn't an abandoned vehicle. Anyway,
no.
Yeah, but I mean that was common back then.
So he thought, well, maybe somebody's been shooting BB guns, but that wasn't the case. So he left a patrolman, Ray Patton, behind at the house as guard for the evening, see what happened. So after Mullen left, Patton had been in the house for a little bit.
Now, this is another thing. Think of this poor guy left to monitor the house. Okay, you stay here and see if anything goes on.
Right.
Whether you're a believer or not, it's not the position you want to be in.
Well, he didn't have to wait long because a glass figurine of a swan was broken in the middle of an unoccupied room upstairs that ended up being Linda's bedroom, the daughter Linda. So he called in for backup, and backup came, but they brought an investigative team, like a paranormal investigative team.
Exactly. Yeah,
okay.
Yeah.
And they brought high-frequency sound equipment with them. I don't know what kind of test they thought they were doing.
Well, the one officer thought it was, back then.
Yeah, they thought it was going to be high-fi.
What was the year again? It was
1962.
Okay, so there was I think it was after that. There was a commercial done for Memorex tapes. This back during the days of cassettes. Now most people won't remember this, but she had a glass that, she sung and hit a high.
Yes.
I think it was Lena Horne. I think is who it was.
Yes.
And she broke the glass, and then they recorded all that.
Yes.
Then they replayed it with a glass and showed that the quality of the tape was so good that it would break the glass. And so. They may have been hung up on that, but I think that came out, that was long after 62.
Yeah,
late 70s, I think, yeah.
But it had to have been some sort of, because they were trying to detect high-frequency sound waves.
But during the 60s,
could have been causing vibrations.
Stereophonic equipment was big.
Yes.
I mean, that's when you had a lot of reel-to-reel, and people really were in it and really wanted the sound, and you've seen this in a lot of the movies, like the beach movies, like Beach Blanket Bingo and all that.
Yes.
They had these real high-fidelity systems. So, I mean, I could see where they're going with that.
Yeah, that's where they were going.
If you got a choice of it or telling your captain that you're researching a ghost, I'd go with your career's a lot better off if you go with the high fidelity system.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, this was creating a lot of commotion along the street, and this is a very small street. Of course, you know me and Google. I immediately Googled, and this street is one of those one-way, like one-lane streets, and cars are parked on both sides.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Okay. Typical Indianapolis downtown city street.
Yeah, basically. This is right in the area of where the Children's Museum is.
Yes.
At 30th and Delaware. This is at 29th and Delaware. So it's a really small little road. But it was now packed with commotion. The police vehicles were all there. The neighbors were coming out. People were coming from blocks over, trying to find out what was going on, looking in the windows. So much so that they had to even call in extra help to keep traffic down, to have crowd control and traffic control. But of course, while they were there, nothing happens. Okay. And then there's an account, and I'm not sure exactly what time this happens, with Patrolman Patton. And I got this from an article on a European webpage that I happened to stumble across, called paranormal.lt, and I think it's a Lithuanian site, but this was in English, and I didn't have an author on it, but when it got down to the bottom of the article, it said Troy Taylor. So I don't know if this is our Troy Taylor from the States.
Or some Troy Taylor from over there, yeah.
I would assume it's this Troy Taylor, and it's maybe in one of his books somewhere that I have not come across before. So I'm going to credit Troy Taylor with this, because I really probably think it's his. I don't know who in Lithuania would be researching it, but
books travel, maybe,
somewhere, somehow.
So do coins,
But in this article, It recounts an occurrence that Mrs. Beck had with Patrolman Patton. So Mrs. Beck, and I'm going to read straight from the article here.
Sure.
Mrs. Beck showed him a smashed mirror, which was laying on the floor. And this was in the upstairs room where the ashtray the first night had crashed. And when the ashtray was thrown, it had crashed in the mirror, crashing the floor. She told him it had been shattered by the heavy glass ashtray that had flown across the room from the night before. She also showed him a set of 3 matched glasses, of which there had been 6 matching pieces the day before. 3 of them had been mysteriously broken over the weekend, and for safekeeping, Miss Beck had placed the 3 remaining glasses under her hat on the dresser in her bedroom. And this is where they were when Patton last saw them. The room was empty when Patton left. But as the officer left the room and walked into the hall, one of the glasses that had been hidden under the hat struck him in the back of the head and broke into several pieces. The glass flew with such force that it left him bruised and sore for days afterward. A moment after he was struck, he heard the sound of more breaking glass. Patton crossed back into the room and found another glass lying broken on the floor. He raised the hat where the 3 glasses had been placed, and he found that only one of them remained intact under the hat. Okay. The hat is still on the
it makes you wonder why a ghost would pick on antiques. I mean, Jesus Christ, he's worth a lot of money. Right? Why don't you break the cheap glassware in the cabinet down in the kitchen? I mean, I'm just saying.
The room had been completely empty at the time, except for the officer who's leaving. And this is an officer. So
that'll blow somebody's mind.
I mean, this is a very reliable source. We've got a police officer. As you have said many times, your reputation as an officer
is very big. Yeah,
and you don't just go around telling wild stories.
And what's worse is you got to document this now, and you got to make it make sense. Yeah.
So the activity continues for another couple of weeks. Let's look at the players in the house. Okay, Renata Beck is 32. She is a divorced wife of a former U.S. Embassy officer. She married him when he was in her native Vienna, and then she came to the States with him. She's well-educated, speaks English fluently. Her daughter, Linda, is described by investigators as being shy and uncommunicative, but the biggest detriment to the tranquility in the house seems to be the presence of Miss Lena Gamecki.
Okay. So she's the trigger.
And
they think.
They think. She is the mother of Mrs. Beck. Now, Mrs. Gamecki is the wealthy widow of a German newspaper publisher who had moved to Indianapolis in 1959.
That name sounds familiar.
Gamecki?
Gamecki, why is that familiar?
I don't know.
Did he do a big paper or?
Well, I mean, the German newspapers in Indianapolis were very big because we had such a high proliferation of German immigrants.
Sure.
And we've talked about them in several episodes already.
Oh, yeah.
And, the Athenaeum downtown, right?
Yes.
Okay. So friends and neighbors would later tell investigators that the family did not get along very well and that they would have noisy and unpleasant fights coming from the house. Okay?
Okay.
So as the events of 1962 begin to unfold, there's others that are involved too. Most prominently are their neighbors and friends of the Becks, a Mr. and Mrs. Emile Noced.
Okay.
And Noced is a respected Indianapolis businessman who had operated the city's Sheffield Inn for many years.
Okay.
But after the strange activity in the house began, Mrs. Beck phoned Mr. Noceda, and then she phoned the police.
Oh.
She said, "Hey, you need to get over here. We've got stuff happening."
Yeah.
And then she called the police. Of interesting note, when I said on the night the police were there and brought the investigative team and so many people were around, Mrs. Beck's purse disappeared.
Oh, okay.
It was again found later on March 25th by her mother, Mrs. Gamecki, who says that the purse just appeared at her knee.
Oh, that's interesting. All right.
However, there was only $35 in the purse when there was originally $125 in the purse.
Okay. Now, this is where the police would take a great interest, yeah.
Okay. So the next day, on March 26th, things really come to a head here. When they were called back because of a fight with Mrs. Gamecki. She had evidently gone into a diabetic fit and was throwing things around, was found partially unconscious, but then I guess once they got her roused, she was even more aggressive and disorderly, throwing things, knocking furniture over.
That's not uncommon, though. If you get in diabetic coma,
and that's
diabetic
exactly
shock.
what her daughter said.
Yeah,
she's diabetic. She's having a fit.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sugar's imbalanced.
Right. So the police at this point think, all right, lady, you're
Yeah.
the one who's causing all this
Suddenly
poltergeist, in air quotes, activity.
They now have
right?
a subject, yeah.
Yeah. So she is
Or as we say
considered
today, a person of interest.
person of interest. Yeah. So she was arrested, and after she got the medical attention she needed, she was then put up before the judge the next day, and she was ordered to either go into a mental consult for an institution for a consult, or she had to leave. She had to leave the country within 10 days.
Wow.
Oh, so she went back to Germany.
Yeah.
Yeah, they went back to Germany. So I guess there's newspaper reports galore, and police reports. And again, this was just designed to be a quick little, fun haunted story. So this is getting into
maybe
more.
a whole lot more there than we thought.
I think we're going to have to do a follow-up episode on it.
Yeah,
because,
most likely. Yeah.
So while we're thinking, okay, this is all just a ruse, it was put on, the family was having domestic issues. However, Mr. Noseda, who had been called, right?
Yes.
He says that the newspaper reports are inaccurate. They do not explain what had been going on and what had been happening.
Yeah.
He was with the family for all of those 16 days. The newspaper reports stopped after 6 days. They got bored and tired of the story, right?
It's not as interesting. There's other things,
right?
yeah. People get bored with the same subject, so yeah.
Right, but Mr. Nosada stayed in the house, okay? And he also brought in a paranormal investigator by the name of William Roll, who was a psychology professor at the University of West Georgia.
Okay.
Now, Mr. Roll believes that poltergeists are actually recurrent spontaneous psychokinesis. Okay, that's what he thinks poltergeist activity is. So he was also called
He's one of the believers that, what most of us think in poltergeist this day and age, that it was kinesis as a result of chemical, I'm sure that's where that was going.
More than likely, yeah.
Chemical imbalance
How old was the daughter?
The daughter was 13.
Yeah, perfect age.
Okay,
yeah.
but
yeah,
Mrs. Gumecki was the one who was mentally unstable.
Yeah.
The older lady.
But if you put them together.
Yeah, was that maybe
possibility?
Yeah, like crossing a positive and negative wire. I mean, the spark happens. Yeah, that could be.
Or maybe mom and grandma didn't get along so much, and Linda was like, I am tired of the constant arguing in this house.
Yeah. It was sparking her.
And she was so shy and introverted that was the only way she could get her frustration and speak out.
Yeah, it could well be.
So Mr. Noseda and Dr. Roll were living in the house from March 16th to March 22nd. And Dr. Roll chronicled 110 incidents in all.
Wow.
Of activity. One incident from the paranormal article I read, again, possibly from Troy Taylor.
Yes.
One evening, Noseda and his wife and the Beck family were in the living room together, and they heard a loud racket in the kitchen. They went in to see what was going on and found 3 steak knives lying on the floor in the shape of a cross.
Oh, okay.
They put them back in the drawer, and
now this is after the grandmother goes back to Germany.
No.
This is before. Okay.
Yeah,
this is during that time he was observing it.
March 16th and March 22nd.
After
Grandma didn't get arrested until March
down.
26th.
Okay, so she's still around.
She's still around. Yeah. So they put everything back in the drawer, and the group returns into the living room. And the sounds were repeated a few minutes later, and they went in and found that the knives were on the floor again in the shape of a cross.
Wow.
And Noseda says, I've never, ever seen anything like this before. There was also an incident from the book, The Haunted Hoosier Trails, where when they were in the kitchen, they all re-entered the kitchen to find the site of the cross.
Yeah.
And then while they were looking at the knives, they heard the furniture in the living room was getting moved about in a violent manner.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that was it. This was the last resort. They finally called in a priest to have it exorcised.
Yeah.
But another thing Mr. Noseda said is that the 2 men had started observing the family, and then they started hearing knocking coming from Mrs. Gumecki's room. So they thought, okay, well, maybe she is the one who's doing this. But they went in, and they held her down to the bed so that she couldn't get to the painting that they thought was the culprit of the knocking.
The painting, okay.
And even with her being restrained, the knocking still continued.
What was the painting of? Did they ever say?
They didn't say in here,
Okay,
but that
just
might be
curious,
something.
yeah.
I doubt we'll be able to know. But
No, I
But
don't see that being
if
noted
there
on a
was
police report. Or anything.
poltergeist activity from
then you
the
don't
granddaughter.
have to. Yep.
Yeah.
It was her activity against the grandmother to try and
Possibly.
get her to
Possibly.
leave.
Yeah.
I
Or
agree.
just
I
to
agree.
bother her.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So the priest was called in. The
So,
exorcism
whatever
happened.
you did to the grandma wouldn't have mattered.
It wouldn't have mattered. No. Nope. And evidently, after the exorcism, the house was littered with fragments of mirrors, feathers from pillows, broken pottery, and dented walls
Wow.
and woodwork.
Wow.
So it was a violent exorcism.
Oh, God.
Okay.
Nothing happened. We don't see anything further after the exorcism.
No. The family moved out. The house sat vacant for 20 years.
Wow.
20 years. And then another family moved in, and nothing ever happened.
Yeah. Okay.
That house was eventually tore down. Mm-hmm. And at the time that this Haunted Hoosier Trails book was written, the lot was vacant.
Wow.
However, again, I look on Google Earth every time I do it, and there is a house there. It is not in the same style as the original house,
Sure.
because I've seen pictures
Yeah.
of the original house, but there is now a house in that vacant lot. It has been
Yeah.
rebuilt, and it looks just like the other houses on the street. It's been built in the style of the
Sure.
period of the houses for that street.
And you know,
But there is a house there now.
if we look at poltergeist in the parapsychological manner that we do now, where we say, okay, this is a chemical imbalance for hormones, you know, mostly in girls, but it can also be occasionally in boys, and it has to do with, you know, in combination with either the limestone or the granite there, and it's all this magical combination. It creates this, you know, subconscious kinetic activity, which, you know, that's a really long way to say, okay, somebody's hormones changes in the middle of puberty is causing this to interact with other things and making things fly around the house. You know, the funny thing about that is when you look at it, you know, that's where this parapsychologist was going for. He was going that direction. So, you know, you remove one of the elements and it goes away.
Right.
And, you know, it would lead to fact if there is a new house built there and they're having any trouble or any issues, it may be because they don't have the same factors involved. You know, a lot of times we tell people poltergeists aren't really hauntings. They're, you know, I remember one time we had a case about, it's been a good 10 years ago or longer. They called us and this lady said, you know, all these things were happening in our house. Things were flying around occasionally. And we get these sometimes where people get very excited and they get a little embellishing the story a bit. So we always handle these a little carefully. But this was not much of an embellishment. She told me about 5 or 6 things, and then she said she found her small dog, similar to the dog me and Heather own, was locked in I won't say locked, but it was inside of a deep freeze downstairs, and luckily they got it out before it hurt it. But said these things were going on, they thought it was the daughter. But then when they you know, because when the daughter would leave, all this stuff would stop. When the daughter came back, and she was like 15, all this would start again. And she said, you know, but my daughter's been here before. Is there a problem? I said, what have you done lately that, you know, is there any trigger here? She said, well, I can't think of anything. She said, we've done some stuff to the house. I said, remodeling? She says, yeah. I said, what'd you do? She says, well, you know, we never liked the fact it had siding on it, so we had limestone brick put all around it. And I'm thinking, bingo! There's your other part of the catalyst.
Limestone.
Yeah, and I still have that document. It's back in the archives. But yeah, I remember when it happened. And she called me. I said, okay, we got two choices here. Find someplace for your daughter to stay for a couple of years till she ages out of the puberty issue, or strip the limestone off the house, one or the other. And she goes, we're not moving the limestone. You wouldn't believe what that cost. And I said, yeah. She says, I'd rather pay a hotel for my daughter every day. And, you know, I had to laugh. I'm thinking, yeah, but, you know, this is the characteristic way to go. So
Right.
I'd rather have her live in a hotel for 2 years.
Right.
most certainly.
I just thought it was funny that Mrs. Gemecki was German. The original term for poltergeist.
Yeah, it's German. yeah, noisy spirit.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
that's kind of interesting. So, all right, folks, that's the conclusion for tonight's episode of Ghost to Ghost. We hope you enjoyed it. This episode was written by Jennifer Verne. It is now time for the Ghost Story of the Day with Jennifer Verne.
Tonight's Ghost Story of the Day is from Haunted Hoosier Trails by Wanda Lou Willis. The Ghost of Sigma Pi. Vincennes Sigma Pi fraternity headquarters, a Georgian-style mansion on Old Wheatley Road, is reported to be haunted. The ghost, so students say, may be Colonel Eugene Worf, the original owner of the building and the land. The house sits on 13-acre estate once known as Rebel Hill, because it was rumored to be the meeting place for Southern sympathizers during the Civil War. The Wharf family left the land and the house to Vincennes University in the 1950s, and in 1962 it was given to Sigma Pi. The Colonel's presence is manifested by roaming cold spots, lights that go on and off without the aid of a human hand, objects moving, and a male voice thought to be the Colonel's. No one understands what he is saying, however. The ghost has one very bad habit: turning perfectly good hot cups of coffee into undrinkable cold liquid with a gust of icy wind. The executive director insisted the house isn't haunted. Perhaps he doesn't like coffee.
Thanks for listening to Ghost. Again, I'm your host, Chief Lawson. You can find Ghost to Ghost on all major formats on the 15th and 30th of the month at midnight. If you'd like to be a guest on the show, maybe have a question or subject you'd like to ask about on air or be used on the show, please email us at ghosttoghost@spiritindiana.com, ghosttoghost@spiritindiana.com. I want to thank my production staff on Spirit, Jennifer Verne, our research manager and our producer, and Heather Lawson, our trainer on Spirit and our podcast director, for helping make these podcasts possible. My chief of staff, Andrew Brooks, for his guidance and help on the scripts, and everyone else involved. Thank you so much. See you next time. Until then, stay safe and remember the truth is out there. Good night. Ghost to Ghost podcast and its contents is the property of Spirit Paranormal Ltd. All rights reserved. We welcome you to download and play the podcast and share with others for personal use. You may not, except with written permission, use or distribute its contents for commercial use. Spirit Indiana Paranormal, covering the Hoosier State since 2002, Indy's oldest parapsychology investigation group. If you're experiencing what you believe to be paranormal issues, reach out to us for help at www.spiritindiana.com or call our hotline at 317-883-9103. Again, that is www.spiritindiana.com or our hotline at 317-883-9103. Thank you for listening. Take care of yourself and the ones you love, and be safe out there.